Hi everyone, my name is Michael Cummings, and I am a senior here at Grand Valley studying geography. And for my project, I'm going to be studying the sustainable redevelopment of the Butterworth landfill site, and I will be proposing a couple new ideas of sustainable landscape elements that can be implemented here at this park. So, the former Butterworth landfill site is located along the Grand River, approximately 1 mile southwest of downtown Grand Rapids. It's located just outside the west side neighborhood of Grand Rapids. It's approximately 180 to 190 acres in size, 140 of which are owned by the city. The other 40 is split up between Consumers Energy and a radio station, so private ownership. The area surrounding the park itself is mainly industrial. Before being used as a landfill, the land was also once used for industrial purposes. The park itself served as a landfill for the city of Grand Rapids from the years 1950 to 1967. There were two patches of land that were used to take in waste of all kind, located in the east and west ends of the park. In 1967, the city shut down and converted the site into a sanitary landfill, and that landfill was fully operational until 1973, when the site was shut down for good. The difference between a landfill and a sanitary landfill is that when a sanitary landfill is started, they put a barrier down to keep toxins from going into the earth, and the trash is layered. The site is currently listed as a Superfund site by the EPA. This allows the EPA to clean up the contaminated sites. It also forces the parties responsible for contamination to either perform cleanups or reimburse the government for EPA-led cleanup work. When there is no viable responsible party, Superfund gives EPA the funds and authority to clean up contaminated sites. A Superfund site's goals are to protect human health and environment by cleaning up contaminated sites, make responsible parties pay for cleanup work, involve communities in the Superfund process, and return Superfund sites to productive use. So, my goals for this project are to determine the zoning status of the park, research what was done to ensure the former landfill toxins and waste is safely out of human contact. Essentially, is the soil safe? Is the water by the Grand River safe? Is possible redevelopment here actually feasible? And I would also like to identify patches or corridors of land around the former Butterworth Landfill Park in which a sustainable landscape element could be implemented. And then I would like to propose implementation plans for the park. So some objectives that I would like my proposal to meet and goals that I think the sustainable landscape elements that I will be proposing should help with are to increase sustainable renewable energy throughout the city of Grand Rapids, add biodiversity throughout the park and west side of Grand Rapids, and offer more green space and outdoor recreation along the Grand River. So one of the first processes in determining whether or not possible redevelopment could go on this land is figuring out what was done to clean up the land and making sure that none of the toxins from the former landfill is within human contact. And if there is possible redevelopment, what has to be done to keep those toxins safe while also adding on to the land. So in 1983, the city of Grand Rapids and responsible parties began a cleanup process for the former landfill. This is when the Superfund Act from the EPA was brought in. Cleanup activities included capping the areas of the park in which a landfill was with a 4-foot layer of clay, sand, and dirt. Along with the cap over the land, multiple water testing wells were also spread across the park to monitor water levels for toxicity and possible contamination. The water testing wells are monitored to ensure no toxic waste is leaked into the Grand River or soil surrounding the landfill area. Throughout the 2000s, the EPA and City of Grand Rapids worked with the community to create reuse plans for the land to potentially convert the land to a sports field or other recreational areas. The site is still monitored by the EPA and City of Grand Rapids, but cleanup has been completed and it is now listed as ready for redevelopment. So now that we know the land is safe and ready for redevelopment and still monitored by the EPA, the next step is to figure out who owns the land and what it's currently zoned for. So the majority of the land is publicly owned by the City of Grand Rapids and is currently zoned as a special district open space. This means that the open space district is intended to accommodate natural or park-like settings and preserve selected open space land and uses from development pressures. The special district is intended for public or private purposes and may include parks, playgrounds, athletic fields, wetlands, floodplains, and natural areas. That means that this park is a large open green space and it is being preserved as a special district due to its value as a large open area in a mainly downtown district. So now that we know the land is safe and the zoning code matches what we need, the next step is to come up with some ideas for sustainable practices and redevelopments that could go on the land. Some ideas considered were sports fields, more walking and bike trails, solar panels, and increased shrubbery and greenery along the Grand River to help with flooding. The city of Grand Rapids currently has a goal of 100% renewable energy by the year 2025 for municipal entities. This is listed in the city's sustainability plan under renewable energy. So this is a good sign for solar panels as it could be beneficial for the land and renewable energy. It would be a good win-win for the city and the citizens. After visiting the park and studying it and observing the landscape patches and corridors, I decided to focus in on three main developments for sustainable landscape that could be added to this park. One, solar panels. Another, increased greenery and shrubbery along the Grand River to help with flooding. And the last, a parking lot and increased access to the Grand River boat ramp. So the first step in deciding where landscape elements can be placed and developments can be put in on the landscape is to understand the land. And to do that here, I started with figuring out where the landfill cap locations were and how deep into the soil they were and if development can go on top of them. So the image to the right is a diagram map created by the EPA Region 5 Superfund team that depicts where the landfills are and public/private land are located on the Butterworth site. The light brown land in the middle is privately owned by the radio station and has a 12-inch soil cap. The dark browns on the east and west side of the park show where the 48-inch cap was placed over the landfill waste. So on the dark sides, the eastern landfill and western landfill, there's a 4-foot cap all around the landfill to keep it safe and no waste can get in or out. In addition to viewing the land in person and looking for a flat area, I also studied this map, which shows the key grade characterization for slopes across the park. In light green areas is slopes less than or equal to 10%, and in dark green is slopes greater than 10%. Pictured to the right is a map diagram created by the EPA Region 5 Superfund team to depict the slope of the land at the Butterworth site. The land must be relatively flat and open for solar panels to be placed, and the entire site is also on the Grand River floodplain, so a desired location would have to be far removed towards the north end of the park. Flat land is the key to putting in a new landscape or development, as if the land is not flat and open, then nothing can go there. So some requirements I set for the new development were that they must be on relatively a flat surface, must be out in the open, preferably located over the landfill cap to take advantage of that big open area space, located on public city land, not private. Make sure the development doesn't disrupt too much land and no fragmentation of habitats. It must be far enough away from the Grand River to avoid flooding damage, and the development must meet Superfund site standards and not impact the landfill cap. We can't have a new element added to the landscape if it's going to make the Superfund site more exposed, and can't have that coming back. So the first sustainable landscape element implementation I am going to show is a proposed location for solar panels. I chose this location circled in red on the image below, mainly because of its location in the park. It is located in an area that has a less than a 10% slope, over the landfill cap, and also out in the open for the sun to shine onto. The solar panels don't go deep enough into the ground to penetrate the landfill cap, so it would be a viable option for here. Other solar panel locations have been proposed around the park by previous companies and cities and have all gone unsuccessful in their attempts so far. I feel my location offers the best option for implementation due to its distance from the river to avoid flooding damage, and it meets all other requirements listed above. It will also preserve the main large open fields throughout the rest of the park to keep the urban green space feel with it. This area would keep the landscape patches together as the radio station and solar panels would be located next to each other, with development only taking place on the north side of the park and next to, keeping the south side and green space open and out for urban green space feel. Another potential sustainable landscape element I would like to add to the park is a flood area shrubbery. Circled and colored into the red on the image projected is the areas that I would like to cover with this greenery and shrubbery to add another layer of flood protection for the park itself. This park currently resides within the Grand River overlay and flood area. While this can make it difficult to bring development onto the land towards the south end of the park, I think adding potential flood preventing shrubbery and greenery to the riverbank area between the path and river could be very beneficial. This would allow for more water to be absorbed into the landscape. By adding a corridor of water absorbing the greenery, this would allow for the rest of the park and its landscape to function more without the worrying of possible flooding coming into the proposed development. This would not interrupt the landscape's matrix, which is the large open fields behind it, but act as a barrier to protect this land. This barrier corridor being implemented also adds another layer of protection between the Grand River and the landfill cap that lies just on the other side of the walking path on the other side of the red circle. So my last idea for a landscape development that could be implemented in the park is adding on to the existing boat ramp and road that already runs through the center of the park. The road corridor, which runs right down the center of the park from Butterworth Street to down to the Grand River, ends in a boat launch area. This is just south of the parking lot area I have circled, where I would like to have a potential parking lot for boat launch users to go. It is currently closed to the public, but I think this could be a great project for the city to consider. By adding a parking lot and opening up the road for public use, this would bring many guests to the park for river access. The nearest boat launch station is miles down the river on the other side of Millennium Park, so adding a public boat launch here would give the city an area where citizens can go kayaking, fishing, and boating all in close proximity to the city. This would be a relatively inexpensive project as the road and boat launch already exist, and it would just need to be opened for the public and have an area for parking added. In order to formulate all of my proposals and ideas, I went through the following steps to find all of my information and analyze the land. All in-person research was conducted while walking around and observing the park. Due to the proximity of my home, I was able to visit the park on several occasions and see the park on sunny and cloudy days. I wanted to see which days when it was sunny out where the sun shined and if the land was open and the sun would be a good spot for solar panels. And I also wanted to see what it was like when it was raining out to see if the land itself had flooding issues or where certain spots get cloudy and the shade from the trees falls in order to make sure that the solar panels would never be covered. And I was able to collect information and maps from the EPA Superfund Team Region 5 branch that had conducted the cleanup and potential redevelopment projects on the sites before. I examined other Superfund sites and EPA-led redevelopment projects to see if there was any ways to implement those ideas into my own project. And I examined images of the park that I took in person as well as Google Earth and Maps images. So in conclusion, I think the locations and redevelopment plans I had proposed in this project could all be very beneficial to the city of Grand Rapids on a number of levels for its citizens. The renewable energy, so solar panels, would help the city meet its goal by 2025 to have 100% renewable energy on all municipal entities. More recreational green space with the parking lot and increased access to the boat launch would allow for citizens to enjoy the river and go boating and explore that part of the city, and it would increase citizen use of the Butterworth Park. These redevelopment proposals all give the Butterworth landfill site new purpose and make use of the open green space that it holds, while still preserving the matrix and patches around the park to keep this urban green space what it is. Information that I studied and collected and analyzed was gathered from the Michigan EPA Region 5 Superfund team, the city of Grand Rapids, and Google Earth for image reference. The following sources were all used to help me analyze and get a better grasp for what had been done to the park in its past and for what sustainable landscape elements that I could maybe add to the park.